Hello everyone, today we'll be looking at the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. This is MSI's first liquid AIO to tout the MPG label, which should mean that it is going to perform better than their previous MSI MAG CoreLiquid coolers. But of course, let's not dwell too much on the name. It does look very impressive and I think we shouldn't waste any more time and just get into it. I'm Vincent Chan from Porter.net and let's go! Let's start with the unboxing. The MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 comes in a huge box, but that's pretty much what you expect, considering that it is, after all, a huge cooler. The text is done in reflective chrome to attract your attention, while a huge image of the cooler itself draws you in. A few labels inform you of its support for MSI Mystic Light and the fact that it is an Acertec based design. On the back, there are a few highlighted features like its unique Torx 4.0 fans and the 2.4-inch LCD display that's on the pump block. Yes, this is yet another AIO with a display on its pump, but we'll get into that a bit later. It's time to open up the box. On the top, there's a layer of foam. Pardon the loose empty plastic bag. This was unboxed during a recent Porter Live episode and I can't remember how to exactly repack everything. First up, there's the user manual, VIP reward card, and the shoutout program leaflet. Once the documentation is out of the way, all that's left is the cooler and the included mounting accessories. As you would expect, the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 comes with a huge 360mm radiator that measures a good 394mm long, 120mm wide and 27mm thick. That's pretty standard. The mounting accessories all come in one convenient bag and MSI supports pretty much every socket from AMD's AM2 to STRX4 and also Intel's LGA 115X and LGA 1200 sockets as well as all the Intel HDD sockets from LGA 1366 to LGA 2066. Pretty amazing there. There's also a 1 to 3 ARGB splitter for the 3 fans. And now, the 3 fans. They're individually packed for freshness with a hard paper sleeve on top of a plastic bag. It does seem like an excessive amount of packaging if you ask me. The fans included with the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 are really quite impressive. They tout a dual ball bearing setup and can push 77.4 CFM of airflow. The static pressure is nothing to scoff at either, with it boasting an excellent rating of 4.29mm H2O. Like most OEMs, MSI licensed the 7th Gen Acertec pump design for the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. It promises a 50,000 hours life expectancy and is slated to run rather quietly at just 20 decibels. Thermal paste is pre-applied to the cold plate, so you don't have to worry about getting thermal paste, but there are quite a few concerns when it comes to installing the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 in your system. For starters, its 360mm size does mean that it can be quite challenging to fit in standard cases. We will be testing on an open bench with the MSI MEG Z490R Unify, as we just didn't have a case that can fit the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. The processor is none other than the i5-10600K, which boasts of a 125W TDP. Now let's talk about the installation process. For Intel-based systems, you will need to use this funny looking backplate. Basically, it has 4 mounting points which can be moved to accommodate the different sockets supported. It looks pretty standard for Acertec based AIOs, so I guess if you have used one previously, you will know what to do. If not, the manual is your friend. Of course, you will also need screws and there's a nice assortment of them packaged like peanuts in sealed plastic wrappers. Once again, if you're unsure, just refer to the manual. So for our system which used the Intel stock cooler, we had to remove it first and clean off the residual thermal paste with a clean paper towel. If it is proving stubborn, some alcohol should make things go smoother. You will probably have to do the same unless you're going with an all-new build with your MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. So then the next thing we had to do was to move the mounting points to fit the LGA 1200 socket we have here. The LGA 1200 socket has the exact same cooler mounting points as the LGA 115X socket, so you can follow these steps exactly even if you're using an older generation Intel CPU. Basically, it is the smallest socket supported by the backplate, so all you need to do is move the points all the way inwards. Mount it behind your motherboard and then use the standoffs with 2 long tips for this. Just hand tighten them and you'll be fine. The MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 has the Intel bracket mounted on by default, so you don't have to swap it out. If you want to use it on an AMD platform, you will have to unclip the bracket and swap it out for the AMD bracket. As the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 already comes with thermal paste pre-applied, you don't need to get your own, so there's a step saved in the installation. We didn't show you guys, but you will have to remove the shroud over the air pump to access the screws. Now all that's left to do is to put the pump block on the CPU, apply a bit of pressure and start screwing. Screw it down in a diagonal sequence to apply a more even pressure onto the CPU for better contact. Once you're done with that, it is time to install the fancy MSI Torx 4.0 fans. Each fan comes with 2 cables, the standard 4-pin PWM and 3-pin ARGB cables, and it can get quite annoying if you didn't plan your layout properly. Make sure to have the cables towards the back panel of your case so the process will go slightly smoother. MSI should have just added pogo pins or something to reduce the number of cables needed for the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360, but that would in turn mean that the fans won't work without proprietary connectors, so I guess this is a compromise for the better. Screw them all in and you are set. So to connect your fans, you will have to use the 123 ARGB splitter cable and plug in all the fans connector to it before connecting it to the pump block's ARGB connector. Then you will need to connect the pump block to the motherboard's USB header. Then there's a single CPU fan cable that will most probably be powering the pump. It is a 3-pin, so it is DC powered. For fan control, you will need to use software. More on that later. The MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 has a rather complicated layout. Instead of having the fans connected to the mobile, MSI made the pump block into something like a hub. Power and ARGB lighting for the fans will be controlled by the pump block assembly, and that means a whole lot of cables running to the socket area of your motherboard. It does make cable management quite a painful ordeal, and I hope you have a lot of patience if you're planning to use the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 in your build. Now the final steps involve removing the screen protector from the display on the pump block, install the shroud and remove the shroud's protective plastic. And no, don't forget to connect the SATA power cable because that's what will be powering the fans on the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. Now that we are done installing it, let's talk more about the features on the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. It has a VRM fan under the LCD display, and that's primarily to provide airflow to the socket area. One common issue with AIOs is that there's no airflow around the socket area, which can lead to higher temperatures for the VRM and RAM. So this additional airflow will improve the situation there. However, it is quite a peculiar decision for MSI, considering that their premium boards that will most probably be paired with something like this cooler comes with overkill VRMs, and some even have tiny fans to push air into the VRM heatsinks, and they won't exactly need the extra airflow that the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 affords, even if you're pushing the limits of your CPU. It only really makes sense in a system where you have lower tier VRMs and a case that has bad overall airflow, but then again, you probably have bigger issues to deal with if you're using the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 in a subpar case and motherboard. Speaking of which, the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 has a cold plate big enough to support the humongous Ryzen Threadrippers. I'm not exactly sure whether you will get optimal coverage of the 4 dies in a Ryzen Threadripper, but yeah, there's support for that if you are using AMD's HEDT platform. The massive shroud over the pump block is also quite functional. Aside from protecting the display, it also makes for a more integrated look by hiding away the bits and pieces that can be quite unsightly. It also directs the airflow downwards towards the RAM and VRM areas, so it can provide for better results. Now it's time to turn on the system. It looks really good with all the ARGB on the fan, if you can ignore the cables. We tried to hide away as much of the cables as we can, but there's really a lot of cables here. There is sufficient clearance below the socket, and MSI definitely made full use of the socket area, but didn't extend beyond it, so you can easily use a M.2 drive with massive heatsinks without having any issues with the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. On the side, space is more of a premium. I'm using a single stick of the HyperX Fury RGB DDR4 RAM, and I still have enough space for a second stick. But you might want to take note of the thickness of your modules, as it might touch the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360's pump block if it is exceptionally thick. But then again, this is an ITX board, so if you're using an ATX motherboard, it might not be as much of a concern. The fans look pretty nice from the side with some visible reinforcements. The radiator is a lot more boring when it comes to looks though. While most AIOs hide the rivets away, I guess MSI thought that the rivets would match the industrial look of the fans. I guess they aren't wrong, but I do prefer a cleaner look for the radiator. The radiator's fins are pretty standard, but I guess that's because it is an Acertec based design. It isn't particularly dense, and we can see that there's a slight gap between where the fins end and the frame itself. And some competing brands have decided to optimize their designs by widening the fins to further increase the surface area. And now onto my favorite part, the ARGB lighting. There are about 10 modes that can play with here, all of which can be controlled via the dedicated CoreLiquid software or MSI's Dragon Center. There's the standard static, single color lighting, Maki, which will see the light move around the fan back and forth, and Meteor, which will see the light move in a single direction. A very smooth rainbow lighting effect is also available, along with lightning, which adds a flash of white to the RGB lighting. The regular breathing and flashing modes are available as well, and there's also a random mode here. There's the Gaming Echo mode too, which can sync up with your game and other ARGB devices in your system. The display on the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 is also very customizable with 4 major modes. There's the hardware monitor mode that can show you the CPU frequency and temperature, GPU memory frequency and usage, or the speeds of the various fans and built-in pump on the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. You can also switch over to the image mode, which comes with 4 preloaded images, and you can upload a custom image to the MSI MPG CoreLiquid 360. If you prefer a more animated look, you can check out the banner mode, which has 4 preloaded images and can be used to display either custom image or text. Lastly, there's the clock with 3 different styles to choose from. The last one is probably what I will use, just so I don't accidentally end up gaming until 5 AM when I have a 9 AM meeting tomorrow. I guess we have already established how feature-rich the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 is, as well as how great it will look in your build. How does it perform though? We tested in silent, balanced and maximum modes. Due to the fact that the pump handles all the fans, the only number we can get is the pump speed. In the silent mode, the pump spins at around 2036 RPM with peaks of 2277 RPM. The CPU goes up to a peak of 64 Celsius while the VRMs top out at 46 Celsius. Pretty good. In balance mode, we see an improvement on the CPU and VRM thermals, with the CPU topping out at 60 Celsius now, while the VRM are now even cooler at 42.2 Celsius average. The pump now averages 2429 RPM. Meanwhile, in maximum speed, we see a modest improvement, with the CPU now maxing out at 58 Celsius and the VRM averages at 41.8 Celsius now. The pump spins at around 2750 RPM now. When it comes to noise, we see an average 41 decibels with the silent mode active. The maximum recorded is just 43.9 decibels under load, which is a very respectable reading. In better built cases, you should be able to block out most of the noise. Balanced mode somehow sees the lower reading for the fan noise with a 39.9 decibels average and 42.8 decibels maximum. Maxing out the radiator fans, see the noise level jump to 48.5 decibels on average, with a loud maximum of 52.6 decibels recorded. Meanwhile, maxing out the CPU fan sees a reading of 45.9 decibels and a maximum of 49.5 decibels. The pitch of the fan above the pump is much higher though given its smaller size, which makes it a bit more annoying to run at maximum speed all the time. With everything maxed out, we recorded an average of 49.9 decibels and a peak of 53.1 decibels. We can't exactly recommend you to run this at full tilt all the time with these noise levels, but I guess everyone's tolerance will be different. In conclusion, the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 is a pretty good cooler. However, we do find its features to be quite unnecessary, especially if you were to pair it with a premium motherboard from MSI, which you should. I do believe MSI could have saved a few bucks by removing the fan above the pump block, and it will also be a quieter system overall. However, for those who worry about their VRM thermals, I guess it is a nice option. On the plus side, you really do get a lot of cooling. Aside from cooling the CPU, the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 can also help cool your VRMs and your RAM. The LCD is also very nifty, adding not only extra customizability to your build, but also giving you a quick way to monitor your system. I also really quite like the looks, as the pump fills up the space on the motherboard and hides away most of the boring bits around the socket like the capacitors and inductors. Despite that, it still offers sufficient clearance for pretty much everything, and that's also commendable. Now onto the less savory bits. The noise levels produced by the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 is really quite loud. It's nigh impossible to run the system at full tilt every day unless you have ANC headphones on. Of course, a good case should tone down the noise a touch, but still the pump fan makes a fair din. The cable management is also rather challenging, with the pump block being the hub of the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. On top of that, system monitoring software also appears to be unable to read out the data from the fan themselves due to this layout, and that's quite a bummer to me. For RM1249, the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 offers plenty of features for its money. It is also slightly more affordable than the competition that offers similar features. However, its performance can probably be matched by cheaper offerings, although you will lose out on stuff like the customizable LCD and also the fan above the pump. The MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360 offers more than what most people will need, and I'm sure that some will appreciate it for that. And that's it for our review of the MSI MPG CoreLiquid K360. We'll probably be testing it on a more challenging CPU soon, so stay tuned for our return review. What do you think of the cooler? Would you get it? Or do you think that it is just too overkill with the VRM fan and LCD display? Let us know. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook for more content like this. I'm Vincent Chan from Podder.net, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!